Hello everyone, in this video we'll create an integration to transform our source data CSV file using JavaScript function. So this is our invoice source data file, which is the combination of invoice header and invoice lines. The headers are identified by H and the lines are identified by L. But the column numbers in the header and the lines are not same. If we see the data, then we can observe that the headers have 5 columns, which are header identification H, invoice ID, invoice number, invoice amount, and the supplier. But the lines have 4 columns, which are line identification L, invoice ID, line number, and line amount. Now we want to transform this file by updating the supplier to a default supplier for some condition, which is invoice amount less than 10,000. So for that we have to read this file first in the integration, but as the column numbers are different for headers and lines, so we cannot read these columns individually. We have to read the entire row as one column. And as we'll read all the columns as a single column, so to update the supplier, we have to extract the supplier from that single column, update it, and then update the row with the updated supplier. But it can be a difficult task within the integration. So to simplify the task, we have to use a JavaScript function, and within that, we'll implement this logic. Now we'll go to OIC and create our integration. Now for this integration, we need a FTP connection. So you can see the connection is already created. I'll check the connection configuration. So here we have mentioned the FTP host address, port, under optional property SFTP connection as yes, and in the security we have mentioned the FTP username and the password. Now I'll go to integrations and create our integration. I'll choose schedule integration and provide the name as intg029 as it is our 29th integration. Now click on create. I'll make it horizontal and click on the three dot of the schedule action. Here I'll create two parameters, which are file name and file path. So I've created the parameters. In these parameters, we'll provide the SFTP file path and the source data file name when we'll trigger the integration. Now we'll read our source data file. For that, I'll click on plus and select our FTP connection, which is FTP001. I'll provide the name as read file. Continue. Continue. The operation will be read a file which is already selected. I'll not provide anything in the input directory and file name. We'll provide this in the mapping. Continue. Now we'll upload our source data file schema, which is a CSV file. And you can see CSV is already selected. So I'll continue and upload our source data file, which is invoice underscore data. I'll provide the record and record set name. Now here we can see the field delimiter is comma. So if we use the delimiter as comma, then we can read each column individually as the columns are separated by comma. But as we discussed that the column numbers in the headers and lines are different, so we'll get error. So for that we have to read each row as a single column. So instead of comma, I'll select pipe. Now as we do not have pipe in the file, so the entire row will be considered as one column. Now go down. So you can see all the data is coming in a one column. But in the file we don't have any column header. So I'll uncheck this column header checkbox. So you can see now column header is coming as C1. Continue, finish. Now I'll go to the map of read file, and under the read file request we can see file name and directory. So I'll map the file name to file name and file path to directory. Now I'll create a for each, and within that for each we'll pass each row of the source data file to a JavaScript function where the supplier will be updated for the rows which are headers and the invoice amount is less than 10,000. Now I already created a JavaScript file with the .js extension. In that file we have the JavaScript function that will fulfill our requirement. So this is our JavaScript file and the function name is transform. Here you can see it is taking a parameter which is input, and the input is nothing but it will be the each row of our source data file. Now to get all the columns of the row, we are splitting that using the split function. So you can see input dot split, and it will be based on the comma as the columns are separated by comma. It will return us an array which is input vals, and the array is the series of all the columns. Now we'll update the supplier if the row is header and the invoice amount is less than 10,000. So for that we have added this condition, input vals 0 equal to h. So input vals 0 means it will be the first column. So it must be h, which is the identification of the header. And then input vals 3 less than 10,000. So input vals 3 means fourth column, which is invoice amount, and it must be less than 10,000. So both these conditions must be satisfied to update the supplier. So if these conditions are satisfied, then we'll update the supplier, which is the fifth column. So that is why we have used input vals 4, and the supplier will be a default supplier, which is ABC Limited. Then we have to merge all the values of the array and return that row. So for that we are using input vals dot toString, and it will store in the output variable. Then we are returning the output, which will be our modified row. Now we'll import this JavaScript function in the OIC library. So for that I'll go to OIC, I'll go back and I'll click on the libraries. Then I'll click on import and upload our JavaScript file, which is transform underscore data. I'll keep the name as it is, which is transform. Now I'll click on import. So you can see the library file transformdata.js was created successfully. Now this is our function transform. I'll check this, and here you can see input and output both are string. Save this. Now we are ready to use this function in the integration. So I'll go to integrations and edit our integration. First of all, I'll create a for each. So I'll search for each and select it. Now we'll expand the read file, and this is the repeating element of the read file response. So I'll drag this under the repeating element. Now within the for each, we have to call the JavaScript function for each row. So I'll click on this plus and search for JavaScript. So I'll select the action JavaScript. Here I'll click on the function, and we can see we have only one available function, which is transform. I'll select this. Now I'll click on the input. Now here we have to drag the value of each row that will get within the for each one by one. So for that I'll expand the for each element, and within that we have C1 where we have the data for each row. I'll drag the C1 in the value. Now after passing the row to the JavaScript function, we'll get the modified row from the JavaScript function as output. So we'll append these rows one by one in a file that will be our transform file. So for that I'll use a stage file. So I'll search for the stage file and provide the name as write file. Continue. Here I'll choose the operation as write file. I'll provide the file name as transformed invoice data.csv, and the output directory I'll provide as a dummy directory within the OIC, which is /output. And as we are getting the modified row one by one, so we have to append the rows in this file. So for that I'll select this append checkbox. Continue. Now we have to provide the write file schema, which will be the same schema as the source data file. So I'll continue and upload our source data file. I'll provide record and record set name. Now similar to read file mapping, here we have to choose pipe, as we'll get the output from the JavaScript as a single column for each row. Then I'll uncheck this column header. Continue, finish. Now I'll go to the map of write file, expand the record set, and here in the sources I'll expand JavaScript. So you can see the output of the JavaScript function. I'll map this to C1. Now after appending all the data, I'll store the file reference of the write file in a variable, so that outside the for each we can get that file and write into one of the SFTP location. For that, after the schedule, I'll create an assign action. Here I'll create a variable which is v_file. Now I'll use this variable after the stage file. So I'll create one more assign action, and here I'll select the variable v_file, and for the value I'll expand the write file response. Under the ICS file we'll get the file reference. I'll drag this here. Now outside the for each, I'll write this transform file into the SFTP location. For that I'll select the FTP connection and provide the name as write file FTP. Continue. Continue. Instead of read a file, we'll choose write file. For the output directory, I'll provide slash, and file name pattern, I'll put star. These are the dummy values. I'll provide the actual value in the mapping. Continue. Here we do not provide any structure of the file because we already have the file reference and we want to write the file into the SFTP location. So I'll choose the option no here. Continue. Finish. Now I'll go to the map and I'll expand the ICS file. So for the file reference, I'll map the variable v underscore file to file reference. Then I'll expand outbound FTP header type, where we have to provide the SFTP path where we want to write the file with the file name. So for the file name, I'll create a target node and provide transformed invoice data.csv. And for the directory, we can use the same directory of the source file. So we'll map file path to directory. Validate. Now the last thing is we have to add one primary business identifier that I'll provide as file name. Now I'll save. Now we are ready to activate and run our integration. So I'll activate the integration in the debug mode. Now I'll run our integration. So we have to provide the file name and the file path. For that, I'll go to WinSCP and upload our source data file into one of the SFTP location. Then I'll copy the file path and provide it under file path. I'll copy the file name as well and put it under file name. Now I'll click on the run button. Now you can see processing completed successfully, and in the for each we can see 20 iterations. As in our source data file there are 20 lines including the invoice headers and lines. Now I'll go to WinSCP and refresh. So here you can see we are getting the transform file which is transformed underscore invoice underscore data. I'll open this. Here we can see the supplier ABC Limited is updated correctly for the two invoice header, because here the invoice amount is 5,000 and 8,000, which is less than 10,000. So this is it for this video. If you like this video, please hit the like button, share this video within your circle. If you have any doubt or any suggestion, put that in the comment section and do subscribe our channel. Thank you.